When we're thinking about the modern world, or what we might call philosophical or artistic modernity, or even scientific modernity, here are two things to keep in mind. And they don't make much sense together, but I think they'll help us to understand part of what's going on, especially in how Camus understands time in the myth of Sisyphus. First, let's go way back towards the beginning of the class and remember what Plato said. Remember, he said that all the things that were perfect and wise and absolute and beautiful existed outside of time, and all of the things that changed existed inside of time. And he said, look, as philosophers, we need to grasp those things which are outside of time, whatever they might be, if it is God or Jesus Christ or natural laws. He didn't tell us. But we need to grasp those things, and then we have to not wander in the region of the many and the variable, right? I always think of that as a big sort of forest in which we're bouncing into these trees, and the trees are the many and the variable. So we don't want to do that. He says we want to grasp that was unchangeable outside of time. That's the first thing. The second is to remember Marx's quote about modernity, that all that is solid melts into air, all that is sacred is profaned. And what he meant by that is that the modern world is like the universal solvent. You pour it on anything, any idea, any art, anything at all, and that thing kind of fades away, right? It dissolves into modernity. So every time you think you understand something, the modern world cuts that out from underneath you. That will be the case in Plato and time when we're thinking about Camus. So by this point, you've already read that very short essay on the myth of Sisyphus by Camus. And to set it up, you'll remember that Camus was writing this in the period after World War I and then again after World War II. And he was understanding the world in what's called an existentialist way. And the shortest, easiest way to understand that is to say, look, nothing can be absolutely sure except that I exist as a human being. I can't really be sure of anything outside of my own existence. I can't be sure of any truth or anything else outside of my existence. And so Camus uses the myth of Sisyphus as a way to get at that idea that for him is central to being a human being in the modern world. So you remember the old story, right? So Sisyphus gets thrown into the underworld because he did something bad. I can't remember what it was. And he needs to push this big rock up a hill, and then he watches it go down, and then he has to do it again and again and again, forever and ever and ever. He is forced to do this in the underworld forever, in a timeless way. And the problem, of course, for Sisyphus is that he has to do this all the time. And no matter what he does, he has to keep doing it. And every time his hands start to get kind of stronger, or maybe his shoulder gets a little bit more muscled, and so it's not so hard to push the old rock up the hill, as soon as he gets to the top of the hill, his hands get, like a baby again, and he loses all his muscle tone on the way down, and it hurts like the dickens all the way back up again. So the idea here is that he's suffering doing the same thing over and over and over without any real change. If we consider the four questions that we've been thinking about, it gets pretty weird. Because in this case, Sisyphus is able to predict with absolute precision what's going to happen next. But he has no control. So it's an inversion of the Newtonian idea that says once you can predict the future, you can control the future. But in Sisyphus's case, he can predict anything that he wants, and he can be doing this forever. And in fact, we know that he's doing it forever, but he can't control it. He can't stop it. He can't punch out. He can't leave. He can't kill himself. He is in a situation where he can predict absolutely, but he cannot control at all. This wouldn't be so bad if Sisyphus were an amoeba and he was just out there being his amoeba, doing his amoeba thing, but weren't thinking about it. Camus says what makes Sisyphus a tragic hero, what makes this a tragedy, is he understands. He sees what his fate is, and that is the fate to do the same thing over and over again, to know that it's going to last forever and that he will never, ever, ever be able to change that. But Camus says there is some hope. The hope is that Sisyphus comes to realize that this is not a rational situation. It's not a situation he can understand. It's not a situation that he can control. It's not a situation where there are any natural laws at play. Rather, it is absurd. It doesn't make sense. It couldn't be that a person would have to live forever rolling this thing up the hill, watching it go down and rolling it up again. That doesn't make any sense. It can't happen that way. That's absurd. Camus says precisely. That is our life. Our life is an absurd life. Things happen that don't make sense. Things happen that are irrational. We do jobs that are unbelievably boring, and we do them over and over and over, and we can't get out of it. That is the life we live. It is, in some odd way, a life without change. It is a life stuck doing the same thing over and over, just as Sisyphus did the same thing over and over again. And our problem is that we're not amoebas. Our problem is that we are human beings, and we recognize this situation that we're in. So Camus says, we must imagine Sisyphus being happy. Happy not because he can control, but happy because he perceives the absurdity, the irrationality of his system, of his fate. But as a good modern story, remember that he's not only explaining his life for us, or explaining our lives for us, rather, but he's doing more than that. He is undercutting the Newtonian idea of time. Because time is not moving in a linear way. Rather, Sisyphus is outside of time. He is in a place where time doesn't make any sense, where time doesn't change things. He is, as Plato would say, in a place where things are inexorable, immutable. But instead of being beautiful and wise and true, for Camus, and for Camus' belief about time in the modern world, being outside of time is actually a world of absurdity.